wanted to talk today about Sten gun magazines. These are Sten gun magazines here, and they made about 6 or 7 million of these. They made about 3 million Sten guns. By the way, this is my Sten gun. I picked this up back in 1990. This is what you call a tube gun. The receiver, it has an American-made receiver, and the rest of the gun was made from a parts kit that came from overseas. This particular gun, the parts kit came from England. The parts kit came from a Sten gun that was manufactured in an arms company, an arms manufacturing place called the Fazakkerly Works. I think this was in Liverpool. But this is what this is a transferable machine gun right here. But I wanted to talk about the Sten gun magazines for it. Now I bought these Sten guns back in 1990, around the time I got this gun. And this is when they were selling for like $3 a piece. I got 25 of them. And what I just did was when I got these Sten magazines is I just tested it. I just went and tested some until I had about 10 or 12 of them that worked. And any of the ones that didn't feed, I just set them aside. Unfortunately, a lot of people, when they went through these Sten gun magazines back then, is the ones that didn't work, they sold them to someone else. So when you go out there now and you look for a Sten magazine, a lot of these Sten magazines that are selling for like $20 a piece now, a lot of these Sten magazines have been returned because they wouldn't, they've been picked over. And their only reason why they're selling them now is because they don't work. Now, there's two major problems with a Sten magazine, as far as I know. And one of them is with the feed lips. Now, this doesn't happen very often, but if you got a problem with the feed lips, what'll happen is the loaded rounds in the magazine won't feed right. Now, here is a loaded Sten magazine. And if you get real close, can you get closer to the wife? And you can see that the round here, this loaded round, sits at an angle. You see it points up maybe, I think it's like 11 degrees or something like that. And there's a spec for this. The rounds have to actually ramp up. They have to sit at an angle upwards like this. And that means this particular magazine here will feed fine. But if you have bad feed lips, you can have a round that fits with the nose that fits downwards, or a nose that fits too high, and that'll cause jams. But so you see what your round should look like in a good Sten mag. Now I'm going to tell you the main problem I've had with these magazines. The main problem I have with these magazines is weak magazine springs. Now that makes sense because these magazines, they were last made like 70 years ago. These magazines are 70 years old and the springs are 70 years old. And so what happens is in these magazines is when the magazines get weak, magazine springs I should say, when those springs get weak, it'll cause the gun to jam. And it'll jam. The jam you'll get from weak magazine springs in a Sten magazine is it's a kind of jam that's very common. And what it'll do is it'll jam during the last couple of rounds in the magazine. Like you have 32 rounds in this magazine. During the last 2 or 3 rounds, that's when it'll jam. And that's because the spring is too weak to feed those last couple of rounds. Remember, as you're feeding the ammunition when you're shooting it, that spring is decompressing. And if your spring doesn't have enough tension when it's all fully decompressed with the last couple of rounds, then it'll cause those rounds to misfeed. It'll jam your gun. And strangely, the jam you'll get is a failure to eject, which is strange, but that's what it is. That's the cause, is weak magazine springs. Now, this is an example of some of the magazine springs in some of these magazines that I've had. Now, how do you know how do you know what is a good magazine spring? This is a copy, a reproduction of a manual that was printed in 1943 on the Sten gun that the English printed. And in this magazine, they show you the magazines in here. And if you look, come on, where is it? Here. And if you look at this, if you look at the spring here, it says the overall length of the spring should be 12.5 inches. Now what I mean is, when I say 12.5 inches, it should be at least 12.5 inches. If your magazine spring, your Sten magazine spring is less than 12.5 inches, you're going to have a problem with the feeding. You're going to have that magazine cause the gun to jam. Here's an example of some of the magazine springs that I've had in these Sten magazines. You notice this magazine spring on the left here, right here, the short one? This spring is just under 12.5 inches long. This spring is a weak spring, and it can cause feeding problems. This spring here is a little over 13 inches long. This is a good spring. Now with this short spring here, don't even think of stretching this spring out and thinking that that's going to fix the problem. No, this spring has already got a set. It's just a bad spring. You have to replace it. There's a company called RTG Parts. You can do a search on the internet, and they sell brand new Sten magazine springs. And here's the difference between the 13-inch one. These are over 14 inches long. You notice it's a nice strong spring. These brand new Sten mag springs cost about $5 a piece. And I think they're cheap insurance. If you buy yourself Sten gun magazines, the way you take these apart is, you see in the bottom here, there's a little button here. You got to push the button, and at the same time you start pulling the... Oh boy. Come on, baby. You know, the other magazines were easy to do, and this one is the tough one. Let's try a different one. Well, this one's got a magazine in it. Here we go. You got to push this button down. You could use, I use my finger, but you could use a screwdriver or something like that. And once it gets loose, you got to be very careful, because that spring is under pressure. When you slide this base plate off, that spring is going to fly if you're not careful. Now let's check this spring here. Oh, this one looks like it's a little loose, little short too. Oh yeah. This spring is about right around 12.5 inches long. This is borderline right here. So you know how to take these apart, and you know how to replace them. Well, first of all, there's a little tab here on the bottom of this base plate here that holds the spring in. And what you got to do is, you've got to push, you got to take a screwdriver or something and just push in on this tab to open it up, so the old spring will pop out. Then you put the new spring back in, bend that tab back in, and you just slide it into your magazine. I mean, you slide this back into your magazine, and you just slide your base plate over while you're holding on to the spring to keep it from flying out. But that's how you replace a magazine spring. So that's what you're looking for, is you're looking for weak magazine springs in these Sten gun magazines. Well, actually, you're looking to make sure that your rounds feed properly, that they sit in the magazine properly when the magazine is loaded. And the other thing is to make sure that you have good magazine springs. $5 a piece, I think it's worth to replace these, to buy these new springs for every magazine, which I've done. I have 5 magazines that I carry in my case that this gun is in, and all 5 of them are going to have brand new springs in there, and these magazines are going to feed better than when they were, well, they're going to feed as good as when they were new. So that's all I have to say. I want to thank the wife for videotaping this. Thank you very much.